Welcome to Habitual Excellence, presented by Value Capture. This podcast and our firm is all about helping you and your organization achieve habitual excellence via one unifying focus, one value-based structure, and one performance system. In other words, it's about helping you capture dramatically more value through achieving perfect care and perfect safety for patients and staff. To learn more about Value Capture and our services, visit www.valuecapturellc.com.
Hi, listeners. Welcome to Habitual Excellence, a podcast with where I have the great privilege as Ken Segel, the CEO of Value Capture, of speaking with healthcare leaders who are in the seat, who are really doing it, really using the principles of habitual excellence to create and drive world-class operating systems for their organization that support their people and support the patients they care for and support their communities and get just remarkable results that sustain because they're doing it from that deep base and their great talent and collective commitment to the whole. And this is a very special edition of Habitual Excellence because of the leader we have and because of the theme we have. So this is a special Veterans Day edition of Habitual Excellence, and we are just thrilled that our guest today is herself a veteran and a great healthcare leader. And she is Dr. Kecia Kelly. Kecia is the Senior Vice President and Chief Nursing Officer at Legacy Health, a large community health system centered in Portland, Oregon, but with sweeping operations across state lines. She has oversight of a number of clinical and support departments outside of her nursing title. And we have watched her do remarkable things as part of a remarkable leadership group to achieve and sustain great outcomes across the enterprise. So we've learned a lot from Kecia, and we know you will too. Kecia, welcome to this special edition of Veterans Day Habitual Excellence. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Very glad to be here, Ken. I appreciate the invitation.
Dr. Kelly, will you introduce yourself sort of beyond my superficial introduction of your title and share a little bit more about your professional journey and the kinds of places you've touched that have brought you to your current senior leadership assignment?
Yeah, it's and thank you for asking it. It's quite a journey, and I'm glad you didn't read my bio because I get exhausted every time I read it. It's pretty much I've had a very rich career, and I'll lead off with I've been in the healthcare space as a registered nurse for 31 years. It's going to be 32 years in May. And I won't give my entire life story, but I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes versions of my career. I started off in the military as a commissioned officer in the United States Army Nurse Corps, and that was back in the early 90s. And I had a very rich career there as a commissioned officer, a very short career, about 6 years, but I'm the child of a veteran, and I'm married to a retired Marine. So literally have been living that life in some form or capacity my entire life. But I actually also, when I left the military, I worked in pharmaceutical industry. So I worked for Pfizer. So I have 8 years of sales experience, and really that's where I kind of got my footing and understanding around the business side of healthcare and the value and importance of relationships. Came back into kind of the more clinical setting of being a nurse, because I think through it all, I'm still a nurse, and have had the opportunity to work for a number of different healthcare systems. I worked for Baylor Scott and White Healthcare System, Hospital Corporation of America. I have worked for Kaiser, Common Spirit Health, and now Legacy Health. And all of those roles, organizations have been positions of growth, everything from being a frontline manager and all the way up to being a chief nurse and then a division chief nurse, and now a senior vice president and chief nurse of a healthcare system here in Oregon. So it's been quite a journey. And just kind of my education background, I've got a bachelor's in nursing from Texas Christian University, go Frogs. I went back and got my doctorate from that same school, a Doctor of Nursing Practice and Executive Leadership. And somewhere in the middle of that, I went and got an MBA. So I also have a business degree in healthcare management. and I'm board certified. I'm board certified as a nurse executive, and I'm also a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives. And so I'll pause there because I'm tired.
Well, we're not tired, and I think the way you've described your truly systemic experience and being able to see the healthcare system as a whole and as it's evolved and at these times of change, I think beyond your status as a leader who is a veteran and has led in military healthcare, our listeners are already picking up about that we have someone special here to talk with about these issues on our Veterans Day celebration. So, Kecia, when we talked about the podcast, and you went really right away to the fact that as a leader, you were really shaped by your experience in the military. And I'm hoping you'll share some of the sort of deep principles of leadership that you picked up in the military and how you seek to apply some of those in healthcare today.
Yes, definitely. And what's unique about being an officer in the military is that at the ripe age of 22, the mere fact that I had a bar, a gold bar or a butter bar, as we call it, on my shoulder meant I was in charge. Didn't mean I had the tools and equipment to be successful, but I definitely was put in charge. So I was pretty much thrown into leadership and management very early on. And some of the most important things that I learned, because understanding that when you're in the military, you're as an officer, you're working with non-commissioned officers or enlisted people who have been serving probably longer than you've been on the planet. And you have government service employees that you're working with as well, too, that have decades of experience. And so I learned very on of a couple of things around that was to have respect for the experience of the teams that I was working with. So even though I may have been appointed to be in charge, I learned very early on the importance of leveraging those experiences. And so I'll talk about two pieces of that. And one of it is this notion, and when I think about enlisted, of this whole thing of doing as I do and not as I say. And a lot of times it's easy for us to quote unquote pull rank and tell people to do things because I'm the officer. And but what I learned is just by leading by example and showing a willingness to lean in and support and do the work that I was asking my team to do, then that's how I was able to gain that respect. And I have carried that even in my role as a senior vice president. I'm in a role that's highly strategic, highly visible. But there are times that, as we learned of going to the Gemba and going back to where the work is happening and being curious and understanding what the work is going and understanding that impact. And that's where people learn to be valued because they don't expect you to come in and do the work, but they certainly expect you to come in and have an understanding of it. And so that's how that's really has transpired. But I think the other piece that's very important that I learned very early on was this notion of leading by influence. And influence is and that's that whole piece when you're working with people who have been in this space longer than you have, by helping them to feel valued, seen, heard, appreciated, you can move mountains with people without, remove the title. Let's just get the work done. And so that notion of leading through influence is something that I've carried in all of my roles. And particularly I can think about here at Legacy Health, me being the chief nursing officer and having to lead some very important strategic initiatives that were going to help contribute to our financial health. And one of them being inpatient throughput and how we move patients through our continuum. As one person leading that work with 14,000 caregivers in an organization, there's absolutely no way I could single-handedly do that. And so leveraging the partnerships and leveraging the relationships and using my influence of my knowledge and experience and tying together that importance was a way to be able to mobilize our organization and mobilize our colleagues and stakeholders into moving that work forward. And we had some very significant success with that. So those would be two that I would just share, Ken, and see if I have anything else.
Yeah, no, and it's great to hear that those two profound truths at leadership when you're 22 years old and you have the gold bar, but it sort of hits you in the face, I imagine, about how you're going to have to lead. And I reflect, so much resonates with healthcare itself, right? Where in fact you have a lot of people you need to influence who don't in fact work for you. And in fact, leaders quickly learn, in theory, you have command and control, but actually there's a huge amount of differential effort people can put in or not put in, based on whether they have respect for how you're leading them and feel seen and feel heard. And, one of the themes that you've touched on is just that profound respect for people. And we always talk about respect for every individual. And it seems like you try to embed that really deeply in your leadership from your very first days in the military.
Yes, definitely.
That's great. And, and in terms of the results you've gotten and leading by influence through patient flow, we've seen it pretty profound. There are public cases, case studies on it that are available, et cetera. And you all have presented at a number of prominent conferences. But again, you didn't lead it just because it was financially important. You showed people the quality and safety that oriented it, and that it was going to result in better patient care. And people really flowed behind that because you were tying them to something that, as you said, made everybody more of who they wanted to be in healthcare. And I just wanted to pay that tribute to you, building on your foundational principles. That's great. Kecia, you've also talked about how the military helped you get focused on your own development and the notion of getting out of your own comfort zone. I think that's also very relevant for healthcare leaders at an uncomfortable time in healthcare. Can you talk a little bit about that part?
Yes, this whole notion of getting out of my comfort zone is something that I truly value. And I think about an example that you and I talked about was when I believe I was a first lieutenant and then eventually a captain, and I had an opportunity to be an aide to a one-star general. And her name was General Nancy Adams, and she was very pivotal in my development as an officer. And as a nurse, that role was not traditionally carved out for a nurse. It was normally for what we would call a medical service corps officer. But in that moment, I was like, you know what? I'm just as good as them, and I can do that. And I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to apply for that role. And so I did. And I competed for that role, 17 other applicants. They were all men, and I was selected. And that was, probably one of the first times I really just kind of put myself out there. I'm like, you know what? So what? I'm a nurse. I'm a leader, and I'm very confident in what it is that I can do, and I can do this. And I was a great aid to her, and so much that when I finished that tour, she actually wanted to place me in the White House to be a White House nurse. But at that time, I was ready to get married and start my family, and so that really wasn't a role that I wanted. But I've carried that experience on throughout my career, and going into pharmaceutical sales for 8 years. That is, I was like, I'm a nurse, but I can do this. And I did it for 8 years and had a very successful career. I was actually salesman of the year one of those years too. And that was all around the thing about relationships. But if I bring it back to today, another area that's out of my comfort zone, one pivotal example was here at Legacy Health, where we were looking for a partner for our lab. And we wanted to sell our outreach, and to go into a partnership with a lab vendor where it's going to be, and us, it ended up being Labcorp. I was given not only the opportunity to lead 700 laboratorians, as I call them, but I was also placed in charge of leading the sale of our outreach to Labcorp and entering into a management services agreement. Now I'm a nurse, and I can tell you that in the beginning, I felt like I needed to read this this 100-page document and read everything to be an expert in what this is. And then I actually drew on my experiences, and I was like, you know what? I don't need to be an expert in this. What I'm good at is bringing people together and bringing all the experts together to get this forward. And so a body of work that had had two failed starts once it was given to me, I got outside of my head, realized that that's not what my expertise is, but I'm an expert in getting things done. So I leveraged all my experts. We were able to sell the lab and had a significant sale of it and on a good timeline. And now I'm managing the service agreement, the management services agreement with Labcorp as a partner. And so that's another example of, okay, yes, I am a nurse, but ultimately I'm a leader, I'm an executive, and I have a lot of experience and I have a lot of knowledge. And I don't have to know everything. I just have to know how to bring people together to get work done. And so that was just really that was kind of that first experience of where I was able just to really stand firm who I was.
Well, again, wonderful examples that are very much so relevant for today. And, and you trace it back again to those early formative experiences in the military. And we all just heard you knit together. You were developed and you were given great opportunities, and you have an audience now that wants to know why you didn't take that White House job, but probably respects your wisdom even more. Um, uh, but also, getting out of your comfort zone in a culture that develops you, because that's a big part of it, but also realizing what leadership is all about and being able to reflect on that. So getting into challenges that might not be comfortable, which many leaders in healthcare find themselves today. But I love what you said about getting out of your own head to realize what leadership is really about and helping people move forward based on principles that bind them together. And again, you pulling in that, showing great respect for the people who do the work and who are the experts. And
Yeah.
I think if we saw that kind of behavior more consistently by each leader and leadership teams, we'd be moving through this period even better than we are. So thank you for that example. Kecia, you have outlined your own personal experience as a veteran, and you come from a family of service and veterans, which is great as we celebrate and pay our respect to veterans. But you've also reflected both professionally and personally on caring for veterans, who are certainly not a monolithic class, but what's important and how healthcare is starting to get a few more things right about caring for veterans, whether it's in the VA system or outside. Can you sort of share some of those reflections about care for veterans from your perspective, with so much
Yeah,
standing on the issue?
definitely. And before I go into it, because that's a nice pivot into that, I just always like to make sure that I express my gratitude to our veterans. And
Yeah.
despite what's going on in the world right now, I'm so proud of my service to this country. And I'm so
Yeah.
proud of the service my father had and my husband. I want to say that. And then, so let's talk about that. And we think of veterans, because a lot of the news and propaganda around veterans was really centered around World War I and II and the Vietnam War. And we really have lost sight of all of these other conflicts that we've had across the world, even back in the 80s and the 90s. And our focus around veterans has always been, when we think about things that happened to them, it's always been about the things we could see, right? And that's
Mhm.
something I'm very passionate about. And we always think about, the person who may have stepped on a mine and they blew their leg off, or they lost their arm, or we kind of go into the physical disabilities of being a veteran. And we
Mhm.
don't talk about the things that we don't see in our veterans. And so there's a couple of spaces I'll go with that. And one is really around mental health. And my father is a Vietnam War veteran. He was in the Air Force and he was not trained to be in combat, but he was given an M16 and told to form a perimeter around a building and to defend it. And that building subsequently blew up. And so my father lived with unresolved post-traumatic stress disorder. And I love my father and I respect him. But to this day, he sleeps at what we call the ready position. And the
Mm.
ready position is in the front of his room on a couch, ready to leave. And so that is a perfect example of what many of our veterans are living with. My husband, who I love, he spent 38 years in war. He's been shot a couple of times. He's got some bullet wounds that are healed, but he has dreams, very
Mm.
vivid dreams, that he still lives with. And so, what I'm glad to see now is that we're starting to acknowledge more of the mental health challenges that our veterans face. We're sending children, and when I say children, because I've got a 22 and a 24-year-old, and they are still my babies. We are sending babies into these areas, and they are seeing and witnessing and doing things that they never absolutely imagined that they would do. And they're coming back, and they look as normal as I do, but they're literally tormented and torn on the inside. And so I'm glad to see that in healthcare, we are starting to pay more attention to that because it is starting to show itself in our physical health, hypertension, heart disease, all the stressors that can contribute to that. So that's one component that what I'm glad to see that healthcare is going. Another piece around it is that we have not had much we talk a lot about Agent Orange. And Agent Orange was a toxic chemical that many of our veterans, my father's age, were exposed to. But we don't talk about there are dozens of chemical exposures that our veterans have been exposed to that have not even been fully identified. And so, as I was sharing with you before we started this call today, Ken, is that my organization, actually, we have a health equity series. And we literally just Friday, prior to this conversation today, had our Veterans Employee Resource Group talk about how we need to start caring for our veterans. We need to start asking the right questions. And when we talk to a veteran and we ask them if they're a veteran, okay, yes, it's great for us to thank them for their service, but we need to be more intentional about how we're screening for other things, screening for thoughts of taking your life, screening for nightmares, screening for any type of unusual physical ailments that they may be experiencing that may be chemically related. I mean, I think that we're going to start looking at, there are some cancers that we have people who have no history of cancer in their family, and we know those things are environmental. I mean, I learned of a veteran in our organization who there was some kind of cleaning chemical they were using over in Iraq, and it was making people physically ill. And so, what I'm glad is that we're being much more intentional in our veterans within Legacy's healthcare system. We are now going to have they're going to be part of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and a part of our health equity index and how we're caring for those patients. So I can keep going on about that, but I'm going to pause there and just see if I'm on right track there or if any other questions on that, Ken.
Well, from my standpoint, I think people listening will first be pausing to reflect about, the profoundness of some of your comments here, including just telling your father's story and your husband's story.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, the respect for every individual and the digging deeper into common experiences that really sometimes the facts don't line up with what the popular story or where the popular imagination stopped, or the question or the thing that we all say, thank you for your service, and that's fine. But, what do people really need? What's the need? And you and I, with our lean principles healthcare experience, know that what's the real need. And here you are again modeling down to, we can learn things collectively from each other. Your work on equity at Legacy, which is very deep and very wide and very impactful for those that want to learn how to advance equity goals more rapidly. Pulling in this special group of people as a study subject and what some of those needs are. I think it really is, again, modeling the way, using core principles of getting deeper to better understand need and help people.
Yeah.
So that's great. Well, Dr. Kelly, as we get toward our final reflection, I want to give you the last word. Are there things you want to say that haven't come up about being a healthcare leader who is a veteran, and who cares for other veterans at Legacy, as all of our, whether you're in the VA or not, people are caring for veterans, whether you know it or not. And, any other reflections on that special status you have every day, but especially on Veterans Day for us?
Thank you for that. And what's interesting is in our health equity series, which we had over 100 employees listened in on that. And it was interesting that, and I'm glad that our facilitator, Jason, he asked the question, what does a veteran look like to you? And because honestly, people look at me and they don't see me as a veteran. And
Yeah.
really, and it was interesting, what was populating in the comments was that a veteran was a cranky old white man.
Yep.
And I was fascinated by that because there are so many men and women that are in service today that look like the fabric of this entire country.
Of course.
But yet we are mentally in a space where we only attribute them to Anglo-Saxon men of an age that's older than me, and I'm in my 50s. And so what I would say is that we really need to open up our eyes and our ears to ask the question, thank them for their service, and then be very intentional about what questions we want to ask them. Because there are young women and men that may have done, we may think that 4 years is nothing, but let me tell you something, when you're in combat or when you're in a hostile territory, one day feels like a year. And so I would say never, ever, ever minimize the years of service of a veteran because we have absolutely no idea what that 4 years included. I mean, it could be an entire lifetime for a young person. So I would encourage our listeners to go beyond. I mean, gratitude is great. We are appreciative of that. I always thank my fellow veterans for their service as well too. But I think also acknowledging and ask them about their experiences. But do it in a way that is not, it's not all about being G.I. Joe, G.I. Jane. It's not all sexy. It's not all what we see in the movies. Sometimes there can be an over glorification of
Yeah.
what it means to be a veteran when there's a lot of things that, and even though some of us may not be in combat, but you're in combat service support, or you're supporting the troops and you're still in hostile territories where you're going to bed every night, not knowing if your building's going to get blown up. I mean, so there's a lot of that. So I would just say that we take the empathy deeper. And so what I would just say, and what I want to end this conversation with is, again, just attesting to my service to this country, although it was a short period of time, to this day, to this very day, I still believe in the Constitution and holding and supporting the Constitution of this country, even as a civilian, as a veteran, and I carry that pride. And many of our veterans do. We regardless of party or anything like that, we believe in this Constitution, and we took that oath to serve this country, to defend it. And I want to just say thank you. And Ken, thank you for giving me a platform to just share how proud I am of what I've been able to do this over these last 30 years or so.
Well, it's a complete privilege, and I know every listener will feel the same way. And I think we want to honor your time today by not just expressing our respect and appreciation to veterans every day, but by listening to some of the teaching that you've shared with us. And I don't usually, but I'll tell just a brief personal anecdote that what you had to say about who we conceive of as a veteran. I'll never forget being at a very large political event, and a friend I knew who was an officer was passing out particular flags that indicated, you were a veteran. And he was going up the aisles, and there were two people next to me who were saying, "Hey, we're veterans too," And he did turn to them and gave them the flags, and they were young women of color. And the fact that they kind of had a sense that they had to be supportive, to be seen, assertive, to be seen as veterans, I've never forgotten it. And the blind spots that I and others have come to think. And I think, again, it's just a profound example of the teachings of the principles that, as applied to healthcare, like every other segment of American society, can get much better for our people and for our patients and for the institutions we serve if we sort of lead from these principles. And I just want to thank you for doing so. And of course, all of your fellow veterans. So thank you for being with us.
Pleasure is mine, Ken. Thank you.
If you want to learn more about Dr. Kelly and her colleagues' work at Legacy Health, again, they've done some wonderful presentations recently that will be easy to find at various healthcare performance excellence conferences, including Stanford and the Lean Solutions Summit. Kecia is active on social media. You can learn from her every day if you want to. And for those that are looking for deeper case studies, et cetera, about the principles, please consult our website at Value Capture LLC. And if you appreciate this podcast, please give it a like and subscribe on your podcast. Thanks for being with us, listeners.
Thanks for listening to Habitual Excellence, presented by Value Capture. We hope you'll subscribe to the podcast, and please also rate and review it in your favorite podcast directory or app. To learn more about Value Capture and how we can help your organization on this journey to habitual excellence, visit our website at www.valuecapturellc.com.